Hello all and welcome to the algebra video for slope-intercept form of equations. Okay, so in previous videos we talked about what slopes are, okay, so what the slope of a line is, but now we're going to use that to write an equation. So if we know the slope of a line, okay, so if we know the slope and we also know the y-intercept, which is where the intercept of slope-intercept comes from, okay, so y-intercept, meaning where does the line cross the y-axis. If we know those two pieces of information, we can actually write an equation for the line. Okay, so the thing that you need to pay attention to here, it says linear equations are frequently written in slope-intercept form. Well, this right here is slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b. Okay, so this is a very major thing in algebra in terms of knowing. This isn't a formula that will be given to you on a formula sheet or anything like that. This is something you just need to know. But once we do enough work with it and practice with it, it's actually not that hard to remember. Y equals mx plus b is a very common thing that people tend to remember from algebra just from working with it so much and understanding like what it means. Okay. So y equals mx plus b. The x and the y that we get here just come from the ordered pairs. Okay, so if we have an ordered pair x comma y, that's the same as the x and the y here. The only things that we don't know about, okay, so once again, we're talking about ordered pairs, we're talking about graphing. The only things we don't know about, which one of them we actually do because we see the letter m here, okay, so you get slope is m. So whatever you calculate the slope to be, you just put it in where the m goes, all right? And then whatever the y-intercept is, that's what the b will be, okay? So once again, y-intercept is where the line crosses the y-axis. So just to refresh you there on what an intercept is, okay? So if you know those two things, you can write the equation. And that's exactly what we look at when we get into the first few examples here. So the first 6 examples, really super easy in that if you know the slope and you know the y-intercept, the equation just basically falls right out for you in the sense that all you've got to do is plug in the slope and y-intercept into your equation or into your formula, and you've got the correct equation. Meaning, if we look at number 1, they tell you you've got the slope, you've got a line where you know that the slope of the line is 2 and its y-intercept is -1. So what we're going to do is we're going to take y equals mx plus b, okay, where once again x and y are just an ordered pair, okay, and the m and the b, well, that's what we're going to plug in. So we're just going to plug in. Well, we don't know what y is from this. We know slope is 2, so we just plug in 2 for slope. We don't know what x is. We technically have plus, and then we get b is -1. Now we can clean this up a little bit by writing, since we have plus and negative here, we can write this as 2x minus 1. And that's actually the last step, because now we have an equation for this particular line. And I think it's neat because we have the equation, and the only two things we know about the line are the slope and the y-intercept. We don't know any of the points. We don't know what it looks like. We don't know anything about it other than its slope, so how steep the line is, and where it crosses the y-axis. Okay? Same thing with number 2, except for I'm going to skip writing the y equals mx plus b, or actually, I'm going to do it for the first 3 here at least, because it all goes back. Everything that we do here goes back to this formula, this equation, okay, where, once again, if we know the slope and y-intercept, we just plug them in. So slope here we see is -3/5 x plus 4. And that means we're actually done. Okay, and that's all there is to it. If you know the slope and you know the y-intercept, that's as easy as it is to find out what its equation is. Okay. Number 3, same exact thing. Y equals mx plus b. We'll plug in what you know. We don't know y. We know the slope is 3. We don't know x. And we know the y-intercept is 2, so plus 2. And there it is. Okay. Number 4, y equals mx plus b. Same exact thing. We don't know y. We know slope is -1. Okay, so technically, if it's -1, I mean, you can write the -1x and then have the plus 7 here. But once again, if we write that, normally we'll see that answer as just -x plus 7. Okay, so we wouldn't see the 1 in front of the x, just like you don't see a 1 in front of the y over here. Okay, so that's technically the most simplified answer and the one you're most likely to see on, let's say, a test or something. But if you did give this to me, then that would definitely, I mean, that's technically correct. It's just, once again, one of those math things is if you have a variable, normally you don't write the 1 that's in front of the variable. But then we go to number 5. This one's a little tricky as well, but we use the same formula, y equals mx plus b, where once again, we don't know y. We know m is 1/4, so we get 1/4 x. And technically we have plus, well, the y-intercept is 0. But it's the same kind of thing in that if you wrote that out, that's technically correct. But normally you would just see this written as y equals 1/4 x. Because in this case, adding 0 doesn't really do anything. You have 1/4 x plus 0. That's just 1/4 x. Okay? But all of these that we're doing here is, if we know the slope and y-intercept, we can get the equation for the line. And the last one of these here, y equals mx plus b, we don't know y. We know slope is -5/2. We don't know x. And then I'm going to take a little shortcut here, and this is something you can actually get used to, is I see my y-intercept is negative, and I've got to add a negative. Well, let's just go ahead and make that -3. And then that way it saves us from writing down, like we did up here, writing down the number and then just having to go back and simplify it. We can go ahead and just take this step, kind of skip and simplify it right away. Okay? So once again, very easy types of questions here where if you know the slope and you know the y-intercept, you pretty much have the equation of a line. It's just you got to remember the form y equals mx plus b. Now, you can do the same thing. So starting with number 7 through 16, you can actually do the same thing if you're given a picture of the graph. Okay? It's just there's a little bit of extra work here in that if you look at this graph, it actually doesn't tell us what the slope is. It doesn't say m is equal to this, and it actually doesn't tell us specifically that where it crosses the y-axis. Okay, so those are things that if you see the graph, though, you can figure out on your own. Meaning, okay, so which I'm going to switch to blue to make it clear on the graph here. We can see, very first thing, the easiest thing is, where does this cross the y-axis? Well, it crosses the y-axis at y equals 1, 2, 3, 4. Y equals -4. And how you saw that I did that, all I had to do was I had to go and see, well, where am I on the y-axis? This is the y-axis. Where am I on it when the graph crosses it? Well, I'm right here, where y is equal to -4. Okay? So that's the easy part. Finding b, to me, is the easy part. Finding slope is a little bit more difficult, but based on what we've already done, if you know rise over run and you see there's 2 points here, all you've got to do is calculate rise over run. So it's going to be up 1, 2, 3, over, go over 1, and that simplifies to 3. So once again, 1, 2, 3, over 1. So 3 over 1, which is 3. And now my equation is just going to be y equals 3x minus 4. Okay. And I got that equation. Once again, I didn't know any of the points on the graph. Okay. All I did was I know that um, the slope was positive 3. And that's another thing to point out here. It's positive 3 because the line's going up to the right. Okay. So positive 3. Y-intercept is negative 4 because I just counted down and I saw that it crossed the y-axis at where y is equal to negative 4. Okay. And that's pretty much it. It's just a matter of counting. There's really no calculation involved here other than maybe sometimes you might have to simplify your fractions for slope. But if that's the worst calculation you have to do, this is actually really neat that we don't have to do calculations and still get an equation for this line. Okay. Number 8, very similar thing. I always like to get this y-intercept first because it's the easiest because it crosses the y-axis right here. Well, where does it cross it? It crosses it at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it actually crosses at positive 7. Okay. And then we need to figure out slope. Well, first thing, I see the line's pointing down. So I'm going to go ahead and put a negative sign right here because I know my slope's going to be negative because the line's pointing down like this. But then I go from here, I go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 over 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's my slope, but if we notice here, once again, it's negative slope, so make sure you point that out. But then we can do something with this 6/4. We can actually simplify that to 3 over 2. Okay, so it's negative 3 halves for the slope. B is equal to 7. So that means my equation is going to be y is equal to negative 3 halves x plus 7. Once again, this all comes from y equals mx plus b. And that's what you're going to use for every single one of these, in that that's the easiest way to figure out the equation of a line. I mean, pretty much period, okay? Because all you need to know is the slope and the y-intercept, and then you've got the equation, okay? So going on down through here, numbers 9 through 16 here, exactly the same thing, except for it doesn't give you the places where you can write M and B. So if you need to, you can write over here in the margins. Well, first off, I'm going to say B is equal to, well, I got to go from the origin. I got to go down 1, 2, 3. So my B is negative 3 for this equation. Okay. My slope, on the other hand, let's go ahead and calculate that. Well, I'm going from here, let's say here to here. Well, I have to go up 1, 2. And I've got to go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can't simplify that 2/5. So just from doing that little bit of work right there, I know my equation for this line now is 2/5 x minus 3. Okay. And like I said, just a minimal amount of work of counting the slope and then counting to see where the line crosses the y-axis. I have my equation. And now that means, well, and this is something we'll get into in a few sections from now, is that, well, if I have the equation and I plot the graph, now I can tell all the different points that are on this line. I'm not stuck with just these 2 points. I can tell what all the points are everywhere on the line just by knowing this equation. Okay. Number 10, very similar. I did want to point out too, this does have a positive slope, so always keep that in mind because it is important whether your slope is positive or negative. Both of these, 9 and 10, both slopes are positive. Okay. But first things first, I'm going to do the easy part. What's B? Well, B is going to be, in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's going to be negative 6 because I have to go down negative 6, okay, in the y direction. And then my slope in this case is going to be up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So my slope is actually 5 over 5, and this is as hard as the calculation gets in terms of I need to simplify that now. 5 over 5 is 1. So that tells me my equation is then y is equal to 1x, which is just x, minus 6. Like I said, technically, if you put the 1 here in front of the x, that's technically correct. But we just need to get in the habit of, if there's a 1 in front of a variable, when we're given an answer, so if we're saying, like, what's the equation? Well, you normally don't see the 1 in front of the x when you're writing out the equation. Or when you're given an answer in terms of, like, x is equal to 4, like, you don't say 1x is equal to 4. You just say x is equal to 4. Okay, so it's the same thing here. Notice we don't say 1y is equal to 1x minus 6. We just say y is equal to x minus 6. Okay. That's as difficult as this gets, pretty much, in terms of just counting slope, finding y-intercept. So here, y-intercept for 11. Easy part is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So positive 5 because we had to go up from the origin. Okay. And then the slope, well, I can see the slope's actually going to start off, it's going to be negative. Well, then let's go from here to here. So I'm going to go down 1, 2. So it's going to be 2 over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Which, once again, hardest part about these questions is pretty much what's this reduced to? Well, it's going to be negative 1 over 4. Divide both top and bottom by 2. So once again, we know there's two things. My equation is going to be y is equal to negative 1/4 x plus 5. And like I said, I can just tell that because of the slope and y-intercept, which I can easily see by just looking at the graph. Okay. Number 12, this one's super easy in the y-intercept department because it's crossing right here at the origin, which that means that's where y is equal to 0. Okay. So my y-intercept is 0. Well, what's my slope? Well, I'm going from there to there. So I go up 1, 2, 3, 4. And I go to the right 1, 2, 3. So it's 4 over 3. I can't simplify that. Plus, I know it's positive, so that's good to go. So it's just a matter of y is equal to 4/3 x. And once again, technically there's plus 0, but as you saw in the first few examples there, if the y-intercept's 0, we normally just don't write it. Once again, if that's the case, then we could say, on like number 11 there, we could say y is equal to negative 1/4 x plus 5 plus 0. Okay, we could add plus 0 to anything and it wouldn't change anything. Just in this case, we have the plus 0, so it's just 4/3 x. Okay, so once again, if you did put the plus 0, technically that is correct, but we need to just get in the habit of, if we're going to add 0 to something, we're not really doing anything at all, so we don't need to write it down. Okay, so in this case, we just get y is equal to 4/3 x. 13 and 14. Y-intercept here for 13 is going to be 1, 2, 3. So b is negative 3. My slope, right off the bat, I see that it's going to be negative. Well, I'm going to go from here to here, so I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I had to count down a lot there, and then I'm going to go over 1, 2, 3, 4. Just as another one where we can simplify, it's going to be negative 8 divided by 4 is actually just the number 2. So negative 8/4 is 2, or negative 2. So my equation is going to be y is equal to negative 2x, in this case minus 3. And we can verify this, and what we might do is take an exercise and revisit these notes when we have the graphing calculator and actually plug these equations into our graphing calculator just to show that the equation that we got here matches with this line. So we can graph the line and see that it's exactly the same. Here we've got the y-intercept right here at positive 1, so we just have to go up 1 from the origin. My slope, on the other hand, is going to be negative, so if I go from here to here, I've got to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I've got to go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so just be careful with your counting there, all right? But in this case, we can't simplify that any, so we're good to go to write the equation. Y is equal to negative 5/6 x plus 1. And the last two of these right here, number 15, y-intercept right here, just got to go down 2. So in that case, b is equal to negative 2. Slope in this case is going to be positive, and it goes up 2. So up 1, 2, and over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Which that does reduce to the fraction 1/3. So my equation is then going to be y is equal to 1/3 x minus 2. Okay. And then the last one here. Okay, so all the way up here at the top, there's my y-intercept. So I have to count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So b is equal to 8. Well, what's my slope? Well, this is a little harder to see, but this is actually pointing down. So if you look, the top is to the left of the right, or top is to the left of the bottom of the arrow. So that means it's actually pointing down, meaning my slope is going to be negative. And then going from here to here, I'm going down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I had to count down a lot there. And then I'm going to go over 2. And that actually is another one that simplifies. Negative 10 over 2 is nothing more than negative 5. So my equation, actually really easy here, y is equal to negative 5x plus 8. And like I said, you can actually practice this. If you know how to do the graphing on the graphing calculator, type these equations in, and you can actually make sure that these lines match with what these equations match with the lines that they have graphed. Okay. But like I said, that's pretty much it as far as slope-intercept form. If you can figure out the slope and you can figure out the y-intercept, you have the equation. And then it actually works vice versa too, meaning if you have the equation in standard form or have the equation in slope-intercept form, you can tell what the slope and y-intercept are just by looking at the equation. And then that's what we're getting to in the next few sections, which is actually just graphing the equation if you have or graphing the line if you have the equation. Okay, you can actually look at the equation and just graph the line without having to do any calculations. Okay. But the next thing we need to talk about for this section is what we call standard form of an equation. Okay, let me turn back to black here. And the standard form of an equation, and this is kind of a little tricky, so you really got to pay attention here because this has a lot to do with literal equations. So if you remember when we talked about literal equations, you're going to have to know how to deal with those to do what we need to do here, which is convert something in standard form, which when we say standard form, we mean the form here ax plus by equals c, where a, b, and c are just numbers. So this is a number, this is a number, and this is a number. Okay. Once again, the x and the y are the ordered pair xy. Okay. So just like y equals mx plus b, this is almost the same thing, except for you have x and y both on the same side, and you've got a number in front of both x and y, and then you actually have another number over on the side, on the right side, that's actually doesn't have a variable. Okay, and I'll show you what I mean by that when we look at the first example. But the trick here is, and this is the big part of the whole section here, is we often need to convert equations written in standard form to ones written in slope-intercept form, meaning we need to take an equation that looks like this, 2x plus y equals 3, and make it look something like this, y equals negative 5x plus 8. So basically, we need to get this into y equals form. Okay? And every single one of these works exactly the same, except for the numbers can kind of trip you up a little bit if you're not careful, okay? And we'll see that right when we look at example 1. So example 1, we have 2x plus y equals 3. I'll show you this is slope-intercept, or this is standard form, where 2 is a, 1 is actually b, since we have 1y here, and then 3 is c. So this is a valid way to write an equation where, once again, the x and the y are just ordered pairs. But what we need to do here is we need to take this equation that's in standard form and write it in slope-intercept form, okay? And this is a pretty involved process, especially when we look at some of these. So like 2 through, I guess this goes to number 16 as well, 2 through 16, actually 2 through 12, my apologies. Because sometimes the numbers don't really work out that well, and sometimes we get fractions, okay? I'll go ahead and tell you, number 1, we don't get a fraction, but here's the steps that you need to follow. First things first, I like to take my equation and make my y term first. So if everybody can see what I did there, all I did was I flipped the terms around and made it y plus 2x is equal to 3. And notice I changed it back to a y because that's actually what we need to solve for, okay? We need to solve for y. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So if you remember literal equations, we're basically doing the same thing, except for we're just solving for y, okay? But in this case, that means, okay, let's flip this around. Well, how do I solve for y? Well, I'm going to take away the x term. In this case, it means by subtracting 2x, okay? So what I'm left with over here is y. But what I'm left with over here is 3 minus 2x. Well, I'm going to give you a little hint, all right, and a little shortcut you can take right here is, well, I don't know what x and y are. So if I try to do 3 minus 2x, I don't know what that is. So I'm actually going to write it negative 2x plus 3. And once again, that comes from just being able to say, well, I'm going to have 3 minus 2x. Well, if I flip that around, that's going to be negative 2x plus 3. By doing our old trick, if we remember that, of doing the boxes, so negative 2x plus 3. And now that we have it written like that, that's actually it, okay? Because now if we have that equation, the rest of the thing says identify the slope and y-intercept. Well, if we have it in this form, y equals mx plus b, we now know slope is negative 2, b is positive 3. And that's all there is to it, okay? But I do want you to really pay attention because this is a place where a lot of people get mixed up with this, okay, is in this part right here where how do we get y by itself? So let's go ahead and look at number 2. Number 2, we have 4x plus 5y equals negative 30. That means ax plus by equals c. So this is in standard form. How we write it in slope-intercept form, first step, let's flip these terms around. Let's get rid of, so like we did over here, let's get rid of the x term. Okay, so we want to get rid of that. We want to work towards getting our y by itself completely. We have the same kind of thing here, though. We have negative 30 minus 4x. Well, I can write that as negative 4x minus 30. And once again, that just comes from being able to say, okay, I'm going to have negative 30 minus 4x. Well, let me flip these terms around and make it negative 4x minus 30. Okay. And then last step here is, and this is the tricky part for a lot of people, this isn't going to work out very well because what do we have over here? Well, we're going to have to divide by 5. But here's the thing. If we divide this side by 5, this is still an equation. I've got to divide this side by 5. But the way we're going to do it is I'm going to make it as easy as I can for you, which is divide both terms by 5, meaning divide negative 4 by 5 and divide 30 by 5. So when we simplify this, we actually get y is equal to negative 4/5 x minus 6. And so that's my final equation here, slope-intercept form, because now that tells me m is equal to negative 4/5, b is equal to negative 6. Okay? And I do realize this is kind of maybe a lot to keep track of for some people. Okay? So just try to follow along with my steps. And like I said, it works the same every time in that you can flip the terms around, take away the x term, divide by whatever's in front of the y, and simplify. Okay? So it's the same thing here with number 3, except for I do have to be careful here. If I flip this around, this is going to be negative 3y plus x is equal to 12. Once again, if you need to, technically there's a 1 in front of that x. But then we just follow the same steps. So if we flip that around, now we take away the x term by subtracting 1x. Once again, we're left with negative 3y is equal to, I'm going to take the shortcut here and write it like this. 12 minus 1x would be the same as negative 1x plus 12. And then we just divide by negative 3. But we got to do it in a way that makes it easy for us, okay? So when we divide this side by 3, that goes away. So we have y is equal to negative 1 over negative 3 is positive 1/3 x. Positive 12 over negative 3 gives me a negative 4, so minus 4. Once again, there's my equation, which tells me m is equal to 1/3, whereas b is equal to negative 4. And I can tell that just by looking at the equation. Now, if you look, I can't tell slope and y-intercept by looking at the very first of the equation, okay? Because normally the slope would be what's in front of x. Well, what's in front of x in standard form isn't the same as what's in front of x when you write it in slope-intercept form. So this is why it's very important. If we have an equation, and honestly, if we have an equation in any form, what we got to be able to do is solve the literal equation, go through, solve for y, and once we solve for y, we pretty much have the equation in slope-intercept form. Okay? So to pick things up a little bit here, okay, if we look at number 4, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say see my numbers here are 1s in front of the x and y. So that means I've got negative 1y plus 1x is equal to negative 8. Well, I'm going to subtract my, or get rid of my, so sometimes it might be that you have to add, as you'll see in number 7 here in just a few minutes. But sometimes you might have to add the x term on both sides. But once again, you just do whatever to get rid of this x term. So what do we have? We have negative 1y is equal to, like I said, I'm going to take a shortcut. And this is going to be negative 1x minus 8. And then just do like we normally do. Divide by negative 1. So we divide the negative 1 here by negative 1. We divide the negative 8, or the 8 by negative 1. So what we get here is y is equal to negative 1 divided by negative 1. You can think of those as they go away, or they get 1x. Negative 8 over negative 1 is a positive 8. So that's actually just the equation y equals x plus 8, where m is equal to 1, b is equal to 8. Okay. So like I said, really try to pay attention to the steps that I'm doing here. And like I said, every single one of these equations, or one of these questions, works the same way, in that you've got an equation in standard form, do the same steps to get it into slope-intercept form. Okay, so once again, same thing here. See, I've got a y, just a y here, so I'm just going to go ahead and preemptively put a 1 there, because I know the number in front of the y is 1. So when I flip this around, this is what I get. I'm going to have to subtract 4x from both sides. Now this one to me is a little bit easier if you know what you're doing with 0, because 0 minus negative, or minus 4x, that's just going to be negative 4x. Okay, technically you could do negative 4x plus 0, but once again, it actually doesn't matter. If you put plus 0, it doesn't change anything. And then we just have to divide by -1. So in this case, we get y is equal to -4 over -1, which is 4x. So the way this equation is written, what's in front of the x is a 4, so that means my slope is 4. And my y-intercept, well, since there's no plus or minus over here, that means my y-intercept is 0. Okay. And going on with number 6. I can write this around as -2y plus 3x equals -14. In this case, since we're adding 3x, we need to subtract 3x. Once again, whole point here, we want to get rid of the x on this side with the y. So we have -2y is equal to, well, almost forgot to subtract the 3x, -3x minus 14. Once again, this is me just taking a little shortcut because technically what we would have here is -14 minus 3x. Well, same kind of thing. If we flip the terms, this would be -3x minus 14. And then we would just divide by -2. So we got to divide -3 by -2, -14 divided by -2. So those go away. So we get y is equal to negative over negative is a positive 3/2 x. -14 divided by -2 will give us a positive 7. So there's my equation where m is equal to positive 3/2 this time, and b is equal to positive 7. And that's the main goal, really, of this is, all right, if we have an equation, I can't tell what the slope and y-intercept is from this equation just being up here like this. But if I solve it and put it into slope-intercept form, then I can tell the slope and y-intercept. And as we've seen before in the last little part in the beginning of this video, and also last time or last section when we talked about slope, is that if we know those two pieces of information, we can actually graph that equation. And that's what we're going to get into here in a bit, is we can graph that equation without having to do any calculations. And honestly, we're doing that now. The only thing is we are kind of doing a little bit of calculation in that we're having to do some algebra here, which is manipulating these variables and stuff to solve for y. But once again, that's starting off with an equation that we don't really know much about. We don't know what the slope and y-intercept are up here. But if we write it like this, now we do. Slope is 3/2. Y-intercept is 7. So if we look at number 7, this is one, so I'm going to put some stars by it. So that means this is a special one, and that you really need to know how to do this one, because this one has something that changes a little bit. But when we flip around our terms here, we get 4y minus 6x is equal to 20. Well, now this changes it up a little bit, and then every other time we've had to subtract. So we had to subtract 4x. We had to subtract 3x. We had to subtract 4x, minus 2x, minus 1x, minus 1x, okay? Well, here, since we're subtracting 6x, we actually have to add 6x to both sides to get rid of that minus 6x. So what we're left with here is we got 4y is equal to 6x plus 20. Once again, I'm just so if you're getting confused at this point right here, all I'm doing is I'm taking this 20 plus 6x, and I'm just rewriting it with the x term first. So that way you don't have to worry about it. And now all you have to do is divide both terms over here by 4, which means we get y is equal to 6 over 4 reduces to 3/2 x, plus 20 divided by 4 is 5. So once again, we get slope is equal to 3/2, like we did in number 6. But in this case, our y-intercept is 5. Once again, there's our equation. All right. So like I said, be wary of that one, because in this case, what changed was the x term out here was negative, and that's what made us had to do this addition down here to get rid of the negative 6x or minus 6x. Okay. All right, number 8, same steps here. We just switch these around. I'm going to put a 1 in front of the xo just to make sure we know that there's a 1 in front of the x, okay? because it is important what numbers are in front of the numbers or the variables here. In this case, we're adding 1x, so we need to subtract 1x. So we get 5y is equal to, same kind of shortcut I'm taking here, negative 1x minus 15. And then I simply divide by 5. So divide negative 1 by 5. That gives me negative 1/5 x. Negative 5, or negative 15 divided by 5 is negative 3, or minus 3. So once again, my slope here is negative 1/5. My y-intercept is negative 3. And once again, I'm not doing any other calculation other than I'm just looking at the equation. And since I know this is now in slope-intercept form, then I know what the slope and y-intercept are. All right. So last few here. So last 4 actually for these types of questions. So 9 through 12, same story though. Okay. We can flip this around. Let's get our y term first. In this case, it's plus 3x, so I'm going to have to minus 3x. So we get 3y is equal to negative 3x minus 12. Once again, I know I keep repeating myself here, but I just want to make it very clear that even though this isn't the order that I wrote it, I'm kind of taking a shortcut. And so instead of going negative 12 minus 3x and then flipping the terms around like I'm doing right here, I just do it automatically. So I know this is my variable term. Let's put it first, minus 12. And then the last step is to divide by 3. So we get y is equal to negative 1x, or negative x. So negative 3 over 3 is negative 1, negative 1x, minus 12 divided by 3 is 4. So slope in this case is negative 1. Y-intercept is negative 4. Okay. So you can kind of see a repetition here, and that's why there's a lot of practice, there's a lot of questions with these, just so you can kind of see that repetition and that every single question works the same. Number 10, we would have negative 4y minus 2x is equal to 36. In this case, that means I have to add 2x. So this is another one where you got to remember to add the 2x, okay, or add the x term. And that gives us 2x plus 36. Divide by negative 4. Which I got a little bit over. And notice what I'm doing with this. I'm dividing just the 2 by the 4. So that way you actually don't really have to worry about dividing x by negative 4, okay? But what does that do? Well, those go away, so we get y is equal to positive over negative. 2 over 4 simplifies to 1/2, so it's going to be negative 1/2 x. Positive 36 over negative 4 is going to be a negative 9, or minus 9. And once again, slope, we just look and see that it's negative 1/2. Y-intercept, we just look and see that it's negative 9. Number 11, same kind of thing. Flip it around, so that would be negative 9y plus 12x. In this case, we're actually going to have to subtract 12x. So we get negative 9y is equal to negative 12x minus 9. So let me clean up that 12 a little bit. That looks a little wonky. And once again, same thing. Divide by negative 9, divide by negative 9, divide by negative 9. So here we get y is equal to negative over negative, 12 over 9. It's a little bit tougher, but that actually reduces to 4/3 x. And then plus or negative 9 or minus 9 over negative 9 will give us a positive 1. And once again, the instructions tell us, well, if we got that now, what's the slope and y-intercept? Well, the slope is 4/3. Y-intercept is 1. In the last one of these types of questions, I actually think this is an easier one than these others because of where these have all the negatives. This is actually just going to be 10y plus 4x. Here we have to subtract 4x, so we are getting a negative here by subtracting, but we actually just divide through by positive 10. And that simplifies, or that goes to y. This simplifies to negative 2/5. Once again, 4 divided by 10. Divide both top and bottom by 2. 2/5 x. And then plus 10 over 10 is 1. So m in this case is negative 2/5. B is equal to 1. And there you have it. Okay. Where once again, every single question works the same here in that you need to get the y by itself and then get it in the form y equals mx plus b, meaning, once again, y by itself, y equals, and then a number times x plus or minus another number. Okay. And once again, that'll tell you as much information as you need about the equation because, once again, if you know slope and y-intercept, it tells you so much about what the equation is doing and what it looks like. Okay, but then we get to questions like number 13, and this looks kind of intimidating. Okay, so if you actually look at the instructions, it says, determine the equation that best represents the lines shown on the graph. And it does give you a hint and says, convert them to slope-intercept form. Okay, so we can look at this and say, well, this line, which one of these equations is this line? Well, those look all similar to me. All of them have 3s, 2 of them have 6s, 2 of them have 2s. A lot of stuff going on there, but that's actually 4 different equations. But what we can do is we can actually go through and say, well, first off, what do we know about this graph? Well, we know the y-intercept here. Okay, so the y-intercept right here is negative 2. So we know b is negative 2. It's an easy thing to tell. Well, what's the slope? Well, the slope, they don't give you points here, but let's say we go from this point. We can go from this point to, let's say, this point. Or we can go to this point, or we can go to this point, or this point. Actually, it doesn't matter, but when we calculate slope, we're going to get 1 over 1, 2, 3. So we're going to get slope in this case is 1/3. Well, here's the deal. Can you tell with any of these equations which one has a slope of 1/3 and which one has a y-intercept of negative 2? And here's where people get a little mixed up. People see that y-intercept is equal to negative 2, and they'll automatically say the answer is C because they see this negative 2 over here. Well, that's actually not true, okay? The answer is actually B, okay? And how do we know it's B? Well, let's look at the hint that they tell us. Convert all your equations to slope-intercept form. So if we look at answer A, we have x plus 3y equals negative 6. Well, let's convert that to slope-intercept form, same way we did before. So I'm going to take another little shortcut here and not twist the terms around, but we have negative x minus 6. So it's a 1 there, so divide by 3. We get y is equal to negative 1/3 x minus 2. Now this one's close, okay, but what's wrong with this one? Well, the slope here we see is positive 1/3, where this one says it's negative 1/3. So the answer's not A. Told you it's already B, but let's go ahead and look at C and D before we look at B. So that way we can see all the wrong answers and see why B is right. So let's look at C. 3x plus y is equal to negative 2. Well, we go through here. We would subtract 3x. Y is equal to negative 3x minus 2. Well, that was pretty easy to put in slope-intercept form because that's slope-intercept form. But once again, we have a problem. It says the y-intercept is -2, but it says here the slope is -3 when it should be positive 1/3. So it's not that one either. So it's not C. Is it D? Well, 3x minus y equals 2. In this case, there's a 1 right there. So if we subtract 3x, we get -1y is equal to -3x plus 2. Divide by -1. So we get y is equal to negative over negative is a positive 3x. Positive 2 over -1 is a -2. Once again, we get the -2 here as the -2 as the y-intercept, but the slope is still off. Okay. So technically, we know that it's B just because all the rest of them aren't right. But let's look at B really quickly and see why it's the answer, just so we can check ourselves and make sure. So in this case, x minus 3y equals 6. Subtract 1x, so once again it's a 1x. We get -3y is equal to -1x plus 6. Divide by -3. Y is equal to 1/3, so negative over negative is a positive, 1/3 x minus 2. And that's actually the answer, because once again, that's the only equation that we get that the slope is 1/3 and the y-intercept is -2. So the answer, once again, is B. Now, I do want to say there is an easier way to figure this out if you have a Desmos calculator, and this is something we'll get more and more into as we go. But if you're pressed for time and you have to figure out the answer to this and you don't have time to simplify every single one of these into slope-intercept form, you can simply go to your graphing calculator. Okay, so let me load up Desmos here. Graphing calculator. Let's go full screen here. So, all right, so graphing calculator. Well, let's just type in each one of these equations. Well, we have x plus 3y equals -6. Okay, well, we can see that this one matches up when it comes to the y-intercept. So you look here, y-intercept to -2, y-intercept to -2. But if you look, the slope's off. Okay, slope here is actually -1/3, whereas the slope here is positive 1/3. So it's not A. Okay, but let's try B. X minus 3y equals 6. Well, and that's why that's the answer, because it looks very similar there. If you look at it, y-intercept is 2, or -2. It has a positive slope. And if you calculated the slope here, you see that you go up 2, or in this case you go, so you need to zoom in or zoom out to make it by ones here. So this will do right here. So you go up 1, and you have to go over 1, 2, 3, so that's positive 1/3. And that's the fast and easy way, is just plug all these in and see which graph matches up. Okay, so giving you a little hint there, but technically what you could also do is go through, solve each one of these for y, put it in slope-intercept form, and figure out the answer that way. So just to save some time here, okay, once again, we would go through and say, okay, y-intercept here is -1. Slope is, well, we'll go from here to, let's say here, we got to go up 2 over 1. So that means my slope is going to be 2 over 1, or 2. Okay, so then we could go through and do all these and figure out which one in slope-intercept form gives us the right equation or the right line. Like I said, shortcut we can take though is we can go to the Desmos calculator and just type in all of our equations. So the first one is x plus 2y equals -2. Again, if we look at these back to back, they share the same y-intercept here. So let's go home. So y-intercept here at -1, but it's got a negative slope here, whereas we need a positive slope. And it's actually got a negative slope that's off. It's not the same magnitude, meaning it's not the same number here. It's not like the slope here is -2. The slope here is actually -1/2 in case you go up over 2. So -1/2. So it's not A. Is it B? Well, plug it in here. We go x minus 2y equals 2. Well, this looks very promising. Okay. But let's see here. We got y-intercept is 2, or -1, sorry, -1. -1, okay. But if we look, this line's actually not as steep as this line. And you can actually calculate it and say, okay, well, what's the slope here? Well, it's 1 over 2. Once again, it looks a little weird with the grid here, but technically you're going from here to 0, so that's 1. And then you're technically going 2, which is just the way it's laid out here. You're going over 2. So that means it's 1/2, not 2. So it's not B. Well, is it C? Well, let's look at it. We've got 2x plus y equals -1. Same thing here is we got the y-intercept of -1. So all these have the y-intercept of -1. And this has the slope of, in this case, you go up 1, you go over 1/4, or in this case, 1/2. So another way you can think about it is if we zoom in here, we can go from here to here. We go up 1, 2, go over 1, 2. The slope here is actually, well, let's see. I'm getting kind of confused here. So up 1, 2, and over 1. That means my slope is -2. Okay. And once again, we can see it's negative, and automatically that cancels that one out. So in this case, we can see this one goes down where this one goes up. So that leaves our answer has to be D, but let's verify that. Let's type in answer D here. So we got 2x minus y equals 1. Okay, so it looks pretty good right so far. So we've got y-intercept at -1, y-intercept at -1. Looks very similar in steepness here, okay, but let's just double check it. So we go from, say, here to, which once again, it gets a little hard on this because everything's gridded out so weird, okay. So if everything's 1 here, you can go from here to here. So that means we go up 1, 2 over 1, okay. So once again, that means we have the slope of +2, and that's exactly what we needed. So the answer here is, in fact, D. And like I said, you can do the same with number 15. We could go through and say, okay, y-intercept is up here. That's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So my y-intercept is 7. My slope is going to be, once again, it doesn't matter which 2 points we choose. We can choose this point and this point, I guess. My slope's going to be, well, down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over 1, 2, 3, 4, so 5/4, And then we know it should be negative, so negative 5/4. Like I said, we know those two pieces of information. Let's just match up and see what our graphs look like. So what's the answer here? Well, let's try graph for answer A. 4x plus 5y equals 35. Notice here it doesn't show up, but if we zoom out back to where we were, we see that the y or the x-intercept is 7. Okay, and the slope's going to be a little hard here to look at, but I want you to look at the lines here. Well, they look pretty similar. They look kind of similar in our slope, but let's zoom out here or zoom in and see. Well, okay, let's make sure each one of the axes is going by ones. Well, let's go from, let's say, this point right here to this point. Well, I've got to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I've got to go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's actually the slope, negative 4/5, which once again looks very similar, but that means it's not answer A. Okay. Answer B, same kind of thing here. We plug it in. So 4x minus 5y equals negative 35. Well, we know that's not right off the bat because that's got a positive slope. Okay. So once again, we can just go ahead and mark that one out and say, all right, it's a positive slope. We know it's not that one. Let's try C. All right, well, if we try C, let's do this. Try C, 5x plus 4y equals 28. That looks very promising. Negative slope here, so that's good. Y-intercept at 7, so that's good. That's what we want. We want y-intercept at 7. Slope is negative, so that's good. It's a negative slope, but here we got to look and see. And my suggestion is make it to where each axis is 1 by 1 here, and then just count. So go from here. We got to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and go over 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 5 over 4. So negative 5 over 4, which is our slope. So that actually means the answer is, in fact, C. Okay. And then the other answer, just so we can see why it's not that one, plug in answer D, and you'll see that it's not this one because we actually get a positive slope. Once again, doesn't matter with everything else. It does have the same y-intercept, but as soon as we see that it's got positive slope, we can see that that's not the same graph. Okay. But technically, to answer these questions, what you would do is go through, once again, that's not answer D, but technically what you would go through here and do is, all right, 5x plus 4y equals 28. Well, we do the same thing we did before. And we would figure out which one of these graphs had the same slope and y-intercept. So here we would get y is equal to negative 5/4 x plus 7. And this matches up with that equation. Once again, that's the one we solved right there. But it matches up because our slope is negative 5/4. Our y-intercept is 7. Okay. So once again, can use this calculator here a little bit to kind of take a shortcut. You can rule out some answers that way because once again, if you just graph the equation, you can tell, well, if the line has a positive slope and the line that I graph has a negative slope, well, then I know that's not going to be one of the answers. That's the easiest way eliminate answers. So if you do that, what you could do is go through and graph all these and figure out, well, which ones can I eliminate just being positive and negative slopes? And then that would maybe whittle it down to 2, and then you only have to solve 2 equations to get it into slope-intercept form. But the whole point here is if you've got an equation in standard form, you can write it in slope-intercept form and check and make sure which graph it is. So this is actually graph C. Okay. Now, with that being said, going through the homework, the first little bit there should be pretty easy. So the first 9 questions, but the last 10, the last questions, numbers 10 through 21, so the last 12 questions there, they get a little bit tricky in terms of you got to really pay attention to what we just did on this last part, which is solve the equation for y and get it into slope-intercept form. Okay, so all the equations 10 through 21 kind of work similar to what we just did these last few minutes on this, or the last bit of this video. Okay, but as always, if you have any trouble with this, definitely consult Desmos calculator. It does so much for you in terms of graphing and everything. So worst comes to worst, you need to match graphs or something like that, and match equations with graphs. Graph the equation and see if it matches the graph, okay? But I will say on the homework, a lot of it is going through and giving the equation in slope-intercept form, which, once again, can be a little tricky, but there are some tips that I can give you if you're really struggling with it. So with that being said, if you do struggle with any of this or you're having any trouble with it, please let me know, and then maybe we could talk about somehow maybe give you some calculator tricks or tips or something like that that can maybe really help you in graphing these equations like this, okay? But with all that said, good luck on your homework, and as always, thank you for watching.